Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I am Jessica Grant. I am a partner and pediatrician at Manhattan Valley Pediatrics, an office on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. I'm a mom of two children, and I am your host for Now What, a podcast all about parenting. For those of you who haven't tuned in before or who don't know me personally, to give a little bit of background information, when we started our practice at Manhattan Valley Pediatrics, our goal really was to provide a warm, accessible, supportive environment in which to raise children. We realize there's lots of ways to do this, and we want to help make you feel good about your choices. I've always been very aware of how hard it is to be a parent, never more so than when I became one. I have a 4-year-old and a 7-year-old. And after they were born, I realized how daunting the task is. I think we're all aware there's no guidebook for how to parent, but I think people don't talk as much about there's also no feedback on how to parent. I am a really good student. I was told all through my growing up, you're doing great in school. I'm told I'm a great doctor, which is amazing to hear. I am told that I'm great at so many things that I do. And then I never get feedback on being a mom, except for that, once a year, Happy Mother's Day card that my husband will make for me where he claims I'm a good mom. But for the most part, I never really know if I'm making the right decision. And on a very regular basis, I say to my mom, this is so hard. How do I know if I'm doing it right? So, one of my goals as a pediatrician is to tell parents, you are doing a good job. And I will actually say that to them. You're doing a great job. Your kid is growing up to be fantastic. Keep up the good work. And when the opportunity came along to do Now What, a podcast on parenting, I thought this is a chance to really make people feel supported. My goal is to provide a roadmap of different ways to raise kids. Here's a smorgasbord of options, and they're all going to raise happy, successful children. And these are some ways you pick what works for you. And then I like to think that when people call in and ask questions, that's my chance to say, you are doing it right. You're doing a great job. And that to me is the fun in this. So we've had on a couple different guests to talk about different ways of parenting, and we have one tonight who I'm really excited about. We have Spencer Russell coming on. Spencer is the parent of a 4-year-old, and he's a specialist in teaching toddlers to read, no matter kind of where they're starting from and what their parent abilities are. He will be able to help get them there. It's really exciting for me because I strongly believe in literacy in young children. It's one of those things near and dear to my heart. And so I'm excited to see what he can teach us. So without further ado, Spencer, please come on and introduce yourself.
Cool. Thanks, Jessica. And nice to meet the folks who are new and tuning in for the first time. My name is Spencer, and I help parents teach their toddlers how to read. And this really started as like a toddler thing. And like, if you have a really little kid, like I believe in you and I believe that you can help them. But the key here is like learning to read is the same process regardless of age. So I help parents of toddlers. I also help parents of grade school students, first, second, third grade, who are struggling in their reading, because the most effective, fastest way to help kids catch up is by actually helping to work with them as a parent, giving them that one-on-one attention that they can't get at school. So I'm a former kindergarten teacher, a former first grade teacher. I've worked for a few different years giving professional development for teachers, for coaches, for principals, helping people improve their practices. But for the last year and a half or so, my biggest focus has been helping parents to support your kid in their reading. So if you have a kid, regardless of their age, my courses, my Instagram page, my YouTube stuff, the free resources that are out there can help support you and help you feel confident in teaching your kid how to read. And I appreciate being here.
Thanks for being here. I think that, when we first met last week, one of the first things I noticed was just how passionate you are about this. And I love that. Tell me, how did you get into this? Like, what made you decide this is what you wanted to hone in on? How did you kind of start your business?
Yeah. So full transparency, it started with knowing I wanted to quit my job. And it was a period during the pandemic where a lot of folks were dying. And there was a lot of sadness. For me, there was a lot of uncertainty about life and just wanting to do something that I loved, something that I cared about, something that I thought could impact people and something that would give me more time with my son, at a time when this is top of mind for folks. So it took a little bit of time to figure out what I was going to quit my job to do. But since March, like the very, very kind of beginning of the pandemic of lockdowns, right after my son had turned 2, we had been working every night on his reading. And so by the time I knew, okay, I'm going to quit my job, there's going to be something I want to do, somewhere that I want to help, my 3-year-old was already reading, and he was reading really well. And this is something that no one knew. No one knew I was working with him. I was off of social media completely. But I was thinking back and I was thinking, like, what are some ways that I could actually make a business out of what I have done, out of what I've done with him and how I've supported him? Because I think a lot of folks just don't know that this is possible. And so the initial thought was like, let's do consulting, let's work one-on-one with people who can pay. And then I thought back to like how we approach parenting, which is we took a bunch of online courses. We took online course on speech and on eating and on motor skills. And the thought was like really clear to me of like, I can take this early reading stuff that I've done with my son, that I know how to do from doing with my students, that I've coached teachers on doing, and I can do this as an online course to help support parents.
And that's awesome. We also started our business in March of 2020. And so we could have a whole podcast just on what it's like to start a business when the rest of the world is slowly shutting down. But we won't for the sake of time tonight. What do you think is important about teaching kids so young? What do you think that gives them in the coming years in kind of terms of confidence or academics, or, what made you decide this was something worth, other than that, you obviously love it, but what do you think it gives to kids if parents spend the time doing it now?
Yeah, I think I'll clarify and say that I don't think it needs to be reading. My focus specifically is reading. And I do believe that early reading is helpful for many, many kids, especially kids who are not going to amazing schools or who might not have a teacher who is trained in the best practices for teaching reading, or the school might not have an amazing reading curriculum, or you can't afford tutors or any of that stuff, right? Kids with learning disabilities, like early reading can be really pivotal for them, but reading isn't the thing for every kid. So I do believe that early learning is important, because the first 5 years, I mean, we don't need any more research to say like this is the most critical point of a child's development. And what like research tells us is at 2, kids' brains are firing at a way that they're not firing at any other point in their life. Like they are primed to learn. And I think that we tend to separate like things that we think kids should learn, which is like colors and shapes and like sharing, with things that feel more academic. Mm-hmm. Whether that is like adding or counting or reading, when really a lot of it requires the same mental faculties. Like one is not harder than the other. So we can teach our kids all of these different things. And I believe as a former teacher, and I believe most teachers are going to say this, when you see a kid enter school and they know what they're doing, let's assume the social skills are there. Let's assume the ability to follow the teacher's directions are there, which are very important things. And they enter school knowing how to count, knowing how to add, knowing how to subtract, knowing how to read, knowing their sounds. It fundamentally changes the way that they enter the building. Like the stress of being a child in school is here. Like the social stuff, the teacher stuff, the interactions, all the different stuff they're keeping track of. And that just lowers when you know, okay, I know how to do this. I've practiced this. I can do this. I feel confident. And I've seen that time and time again. And on the flip side, I have been a kid who's been in school and who struggled, and it sucks. And I would argue like the biggest demographic of people who follow me, who support me, who are teaching their kids to read are people who've had my experience of being the bad reader, and they're trying to prevent that for their kids.
And I mean, we talked a little bit before, but I don't have a lot of memories from first grade, but one of the 2 memories I have is being the worst reader in the class, and how I remember that, 40 odd years later. So I think it really does stick with you. Are there particular milestones you look for to know a kid is ready to read? Is there anything that you can you start at any time, or do you want to have certain kind of things you're seeing in them that let you know, like, potty training? We see a kid kind of giving certain signs and we're like, jump now, this is their window. Is that how reading is, or can you just start at any time?
I think there's 2 answers. The first I'll give kind of like a kind of vague answer, and the second I'll get much more concrete. So kind of like the vague philosophy is when kids are born, we know that kids can't speak yet, but we are constantly speaking and exposing them to language with the understanding that they are understanding more than they're expressing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know of anyone who says, let's wait until 16 months to teach them to talk, because they can't talk before that. Because we know that their brain is processing and understanding, it's picking up on diction and language and all this other stuff. The brain is being specially formalized for that language that they're hearing, so that when they're ready, they can take off and they've already got that information. Learning colors, shapes, objects, people's names, all of that works the same way. Like a child is hearing this, and even before they can say mom, they know who mom is. Even before they can say red, they might know what red is if they're taught. And one of the first steps to learning how to read is learning the letter sounds. So you certainly can be exposing a child to the letter sounds before they can talk, knowing that they're probably going to be picking up on some of it. Okay, that's like the general answer. That said, in terms of like what I would call more direct teaching, so something outside of just exposing kids, I recommend that parents do wait until the child is making more sounds. So what we're looking for is, if we're going to start teaching them that like this as t, then I want them to be able to physically make the t sound before I start teaching them. So we're looking for how many sounds can the child say. At the same time, we're looking for the child's memory. And we're seeing, okay, if they learn something one day, are they remembering it the next day? Which is giving us some indication of like the cognitive functioning. And if these two things are together and we say, okay, they can literally say this sound and they can remember things from one day to another, where a child can 100% remember that this says t, right? The two questions from there in terms of readiness are really about the parent, which is, do you believe that they can do it? Do you believe that they can focus? Do you believe that they can do it? Because your belief is going to affect how you work with them. And are you ready to get started? Because you can believe in them, they can be ready and all this sort of stuff. But if you're not willing to make the time as a parent, which is tough, it's tough to carve out. I get it. I've had to do that with my son. If you're not willing to make the time, then I would say that you are not ready. So there's a couple things we look for in the child, a couple things we look for in the parent, but ultimately this can start a lot earlier than many people think.
Okay. And I noticed you said letter sounds. You did not say letter. You did not say this is a T. You said this makes a T sound. So I think that's an important distinction if you want to talk a little bit about that, because I listen sometimes to when you speak on Instagram and I didn't really appreciate that difference until I listened to you speaking. And I was like, oh yeah, maybe I've gone about this a little bit the wrong way.
You know, it's a hot subject in reading. There are people who will argue teach letter names first and then sounds. There are people who will argue sounds, then names. There's people who will do both at once. Ultimately, your child needs to know both. But it is the sounds that we use to read. So the research that has been done to date has said that the number of letter names a child knows is one of the best predictors of their future reading outcomes. However, what we know about research is generally looking back at how things have been done, and how things have been done as we've been teaching letter names. And we also know that kids who go to school knowing letter names are predominantly white, wealthier kids, or kids with access to better childcare, better resources, that sort of thing. So a lot of this kind of early reading research is essentially studying a system that I'm trying to break down. And what I want parents to do is I want parents to teach kids to read in a way where they're going to see them reading as soon as possible. Because as a parent, that's motivating. It feels good. It feels like an accomplishment and encourages you to keep going. Because a lot of times it's like, okay, we can get down to the science and the theory, and this person says this person says that. Ultimately, I've got to convince someone to make 5 minutes. And that's not easy. And part of how I get people to take 5 minutes is to say, if we do this, you're going to actually see your kid read their first word. And that helps to keep it motivating. So I actually do believe it's the smarter move. But if you want to teach the letter names both at the same time, that's fine. It's just not going to be the thing that gets your kid reading.
Okay. And you mentioned 5 minutes. You know, as a working mom, the idea of teaching my child to read, which I missed the boat on my 7-year-old, but I still could, work on my 4-year-olds. Does it take how much time commitment would you be asking a parent to put in to kind of begin to see something? Do they need a half an hour? Do they need, I think asking a parent for an hour a day is hard for a lot of parents. What do you kind of tell parents to expect if they work through a program like with you? What do they need to set aside? And I realize more might go faster, but what's like a reasonable approach?
Yeah. My goal for folks is to work up to about 5 to 10 minutes.
Wow, that's pretty doable, I think.
And we're working up to that.
Mhm.
A lot of this is going to depend on the kind of like systems and structures and rules of the house and the specific kid and what they're used to or not used to. Some kids are used to focusing a little bit longer when they get started. Some kids aren't. So at the beginning, you literally take what your kid gives you. If your kid gives you 30 seconds, you take 30 seconds. If they give you 15 seconds, you take 15 seconds. You got them to say one sound, that's your win. The goal is you build a routine. And that's why the first 2 weeks of any school year, trained professional teachers are taking 2 to 3 weeks literally just to build routines before we even teach anything. So the initial goal isn't your kid is learning a bunch of sounds. The initial goal is your kid is getting used to the activity. They're understanding the assignment. They know what to do. And then that enables them to kind of focus. Okay, I know what's happening. I can expect it. Now let me start to learn. So we're taking what they give us. We're working up to 5, maybe 10 minutes at a time. We're showing the sounds in a way that's engaging. We're getting them to hit the sounds, to throw the sounds, to jump on the sounds. I have videos of kids jumping off of couches or coloring them or painting them, getting them focused on the sound in some way that they like for as long as they give us. And then it's going to get a little longer. The focus is going to grow as they get used to it.
Does it matter if it's at the same time every day? Does it have to be like we do it before dinner every day, or can parents kind of fit it in where they can?
I recommend considering 2 things, which is best time for you, best time for your kid. Best time for you might be after a glass of wine. Best time for you might be after eating. Best time for you might be before work, right? Yep. It like really depends. Me, I would get a beer. I would go downstairs. I've already eaten. I've got my drink. I feel focused. I'm ready to go. That's what I did. When I switched jobs and I got a promotion, I was doing something else. I had to switch to the morning because then I was having extra work that kind of piled up in the evening time where I'd normally be reading to him and putting him down. Right. And then best time for the kid, I have a lot of parents who do this during bath time because the kid is they're calm, they're enjoying it. They see the surroundings, they're playing with the sounds in the water or that sort of thing. I have a lot of people who do it during meal times as the kid is eating, they're happy. And you really just have to balance the two, because if it's not a good time for your kid, then they're not going to be super focused. And if it's not a good time for you, then you can't stick to it. And ultimately, routine is better. If you can nail the same time, the same place, the same lighting, like every single time, that's going to put your kid in a place where they're calm and they're able to focus. So what I recommend is you take your best guess. Best guess time, best guess as the place. If it completely fails, do something else. But if it's okay, you just make small changes each day. So the change is as small as possible. It still feels super similar, but you're kind of slowly refining and tweaking this routine over time so your kid can maintain the focus and stay comfortable while you're working with them.
Right. And before, I do have a couple like specific questions about reading, but
Yeah, of course.
As a more general question, and then maybe we'll hone in a little bit, when should a parent contact you? Where are the different entry points? So when's a good time to do a program with you? Obviously, there's toddlerhood, and there's also the kids who have trouble. So when should they reach out to you? And maybe you can give a few different entry points that they would call you.
Yeah. I will give you 4 entry points. And these are typically the 4 groups of people who reach out to me. Number 1 is parents who are expecting or parents with babies. And for these parents, I think following my page, having my resources, this is not to purchase my course. Don't purchase my stuff at this point. Don't give me money. This is just to watch the advice, to get a sense, to know what to expect. I think this calms a lot of folks down, knowing that they've got plenty of time, they're getting the knowledge, they can apply it whenever. It's not saying that they're going to teach their baby. It's just saying, okay, I've got the information, I feel confident. The same way that when we were expecting my son, I knew how to teach reading. I felt confident going in. I didn't know when I was going to do it, but I knew when it comes time, I know how to do this. That's how the kind of first group of people I think feel. Group number 2 is parents of toddlers, and this is kind of 18 months to 4 years old, who are either noticing that their kid is expressing interest in books or letters, or who are trying to give their kid a head start, give them a jump, who for some reason think that learning to read is going to help their child in their life and their development in school. And there's any number of reasons why. A lot of these people, I'd say this is probably half of the people who follow me, who purchase my courses, are people of 18 months to 4 years old who are trying to kind of give their kids that jump because they think that it's going to be helpful for them. I would put maybe up to 5 years old. Category 3 is homeschool families. And so this would be, you are homeschooling, your kid is pre-K, more likely they're kindergarten or first grade, and you're just looking for better resources. You are looking for support. So instead of buying kind of like a pre-packaged curriculum, you get my course plus other families doing the course, plus access to me. You want to be able to ask questions for me to look at your videos, to give you tips, that sort of thing. I can help support parents who are choosing to teach their kid at home. And category 4, which is growing and unfortunately is going to grow as the school year goes on, is parents of older children, 6, 7, 8, and 9 years old, who are struggling to read. And these are kids who know it. They're not excited about reading. They don't want to read. They've internalized negative beliefs about themselves. I'd say this is probably up to about 25% of the families who work with me now. And I've only been doing this for a year and a half, but I know how the cycle is going to go because I've been a teacher. And when that first parent-teacher conference hits, I'm going to get a wave of them. When kids go home for winter break, I'm going to get another wave. And in the spring, I'm going to get a big wave of folks. Because a lot of parents don't realize the kid is behind until usually second grade. Because you can get by first grade on memorized words. And a lot of teachers aren't tracking this data super closely. But second grade hits, I'm getting a lot of those families, unfortunately, who are reaching out for help, and I'm happy to support them. I will go above and beyond if you have an older kid to help you support them and get them caught up, because that's the most important. Out of all these 4 groups, that one is the most important to help get your kid where they need to go.
I know you've only been doing it for a year and a half, so you may not have a good answer, but I'm just curious, do you think the pandemic has increased, do you think that those kids who, my daughter did kindergarten on Zoom, she was 5 and she was half on Zoom. Do you think the pandemic increased that pool of kids who are struggling at 6, 7, 8, that kind of losing that year, 2 years of being in a set classroom?
I do. I want to say I've read articles about this. I have read articles about this. So I know it is a real thing. The learning loss that happened during the pandemic. But, and I want to say this carefully, at the same time, I think people sometimes might be attributing too much to the pandemic, where we know every year, most kids are reading below grade level. 2/3 of third graders are reading below grade level. A large percentage of American adults are functionally illiterate. The average reading level for American adults is middle school. It's 8th grade. So that is without the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I don't talk about a lot of this on my page because my goal is never fear. I walk a very, very, very fine line because I talk to parents of young children. And what I will never do, never ever, is scare a parent into buying my stuff, scare a parent into teaching their kid how to read. But the reality is, as kids get older, people do need to know it is very typical for the gap between where your kid is and where they need to be to increase as your child goes through their school career. And if you've ever been a struggling reader, then you've probably felt that gap increase too.
Do you think that kids, sorry, I keep saying I'm going to get to the nitty gritty, but I'm too fascinated by all the rest. Do you think that kids who do a course and start to read earlier and are supported, do you think in the long run they're happier readers? One of my big goals with my kids has been, I want you to, we've all seen the kids who hate reading, right? It's like, please take out a book, please read. And, I want my kids to love reading. I love books. I love reading. I think they provide so many different benefits in terms of education, in terms of happiness, in terms of communicate, whatever. Do you think that they end up being happier readers because they're more confident as they head into school? Do you have any, I don't know if you know yet. I don't know if you've been doing it long enough to see the outcome at the other end yet.
It's kind of a complicated question, and I will try and give a simple answer. It's complicated because a lot of the research that has been done on this has been deeply flawed. And it is like research that folks cite on social media without context that compares like when and how kids learn to read. And it oftentimes compares kids in low income households who are being taught to read at, say, 4, and kids who are paying a lot of money for very expensive, very effective private schools who don't teach reading until 7. And so what they'll say is, oh, these kids who learn to read at 4, by 3rd grade, they were at the same spot as the kid who learned to read in 7. And the kids who learned to read at 7 had like better life outcomes. Like, they have more money. Or it's comparing kids in the US reading early with kids in Finland. And it's like, it's a completely different phonics system and it's a different culture. And it's different, So I think a lot of the research has been bad and it is very misleading. So when I talk about the impact of my program, the impact of early reading, I don't try and cite kind of like random research, which I can kind of pull and look at like the correlation between like reading ability and outcomes, reading ability in prisons. Like I can pull all that stuff. My argument is a common sense one. And I'm honestly not trying to convince anybody. If you don't think reading is important for your kid, don't do it. I disagree with you, don't do it. Your choice as a parent. On a common sense level, if you were ever in school and you felt like you were ahead, it felt good. It affects other areas. If you were in school and you felt like you were behind, it feels bad. Do I want my son to feel good or to feel bad in school? If I can do things that are going to set him up, and it's not just reading, it's social skills and it's behavior and it's math and it's all this other stuff. But if I can do things to set him up to have a more positive experience than I did in school, then that's what I'm going to do. But I think the like actual answer is it's really not to me so much about like, it's just the age a kid learns to read. I think it's how a kid learns to read. And if you're doing this in a way that feels forced, that feels like just like rote memorization of words or it's ineffective, or, I get a lot of stories from parents who they were hit when they were learning to read. They get hit with the book or hit with something, or the parent got really frustrated. Like I try and tell parents, your kids can feel your energy. Even if you don't think they can, kids feel and understand energy. So if you're creating a negative environment and feeling around reading, I don't care how young the kid is, you're probably not going to set them up for a very positive experience. But if you're able to create a positive environment, get them involved, get them moving, get them interacting and engaging, and they read early, I just can't see how that's not a net positive for the child. And I will talk about my son very, very rarely publicly, but as a 4-year-old, he's reading chapter books and he's at the point where he can pick up a book and he can read and he can learn information. There's a transition that usually happens in 2nd grade from learning to read to reading to learn. And he's made that transition. So when we walk around, he's reading signs. He's saying, why do they want help when he's reading the help wanted sign, right? He's understanding and he's processing. And I'm watching my son go through life in a way that I never had the opportunity to. So my personal argument is I think it helps, but like also don't force it. Make sure that you're teaching it in a way that makes sense. And if you ultimately can't come into this in a place that's calm and patient and loving and caring, then you definitely should not be touching this at all, because it's going to be a net negative versus a net positive.
I feel like you're telling me sitting with the taboo buzzer next to my daughter and buzzing her when she does words wrong is is not the right way to be teaching her. So maybe I will try to be calmer and kinder to my 7-year-old who makes me a little crazy sometimes. So, getting a little more into the nitty gritty. I know you talk a lot about the letter sounds, and
Yep.
what is your thought? And I have a feeling you'll have an opinion on, my daughter's school in kindergarten said to us, do not do letter sounds, do sight words. That's how we're starting, and then we will do sounds. What is your thought on sight words? And, assuming you don't think it's the best way to start, how do you help parents with when the school is saying, do it this way, and they're trying to do it a different way? How do you gel that?
Yeah. Do you have like an example of like 2 or 3 of the words that they're telling you?
That they did in the beginning. She by the end, I mean, they started with like and and like very simple words, go, were the kind of initial words they did. And then by the end of, first grade, they were memorizing, like friend, so words that were a little more complicated, right?
Mhm.
They had some combined sounds. But her
Yep.
initial words were, and go. I don't remember more because this was going back 2 years, but I remember being very surprised because I thought we taught by sounds from the beginning. So
Yep.
and it made me feel very, I will say, it made me feel very inept at teaching her. So I was like, here, you're telling me not to do something that I thought was a good thing that I was doing with her. So then I kind of threw up my hands and said, I'm just going to let school do this, which obviously was not probably the right takeaway, but I think
Yeah.
probably was a common
Yeah.
reaction as a parent.
Yep. Okay. Let's
I
take the
gave
word
you a lot
and.
to unpack there.
Yeah. I got you covered. Let's take the word and. Is this showing for you the correct
Yep.
way?
It looks perfect.
3 sounds. And. Okay. The one part of this word that's a little bit tricky is the fact that the A in certain situations is a little nasally. So this is more of like an than it is like a pure Okay.
Mhm.
That aside, if you teach a child, this says this says and this is d, you teach them how to blend it together and then they can read this word, but they can also read any 3-sound word that has like a simple vowel and 2 simple consonants. If they can read and, they can read hat, and they can read cop,
Mhm.
and they can read sit, and they can read hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of other 3-sound words. They have the skill to be able to do it. If you teach them to memorize the word and,
Mhm.
your child can read 1 word.
Mhm.
So it is a matter of like, what is the most effective way to
Mhm.
teach a child to read all of the different words that they're going to see? And so the next argument is like, okay, sight words are sight words because they're hard to read. They're generally have tricky parts of them, words that are harder than and so one of the, like a common word is like said. And so said is challenging because it's got these
Mhm.
2 sounds that are saying exactly what we think, s and d, and it's got this part in the middle that AI is saying where it really should be saying a. And so we've got 2 options with the word said. Option 1 is, okay, let's just memorize it. Every time you see it, you say the word. You say said, okay? And you're really relying on your kid's ability to recognize and see that whole word. The other option is, let's teach them just that part that's challenging. Again, if we've been teaching them the letter sounds, they know this says s, they know it says d. If we teach them blending, they know how to put the 3 sounds together. The only thing they're missing is this middle part here. So I say, Jessica, this A and I, it looks like it says A, but in this word, it actually says eh. So let's try sounding this word out with eh in the middle. And you say said. And what that does is not only does it help a child understand other words that might have that pattern,
Mhm.
right? Other words that might have, there's actually not a ton that have the AI saying but in like most sight words, there is a part that does repeat in other words.
Mhm.
So being able to pull that out is going to help you read more words. Perfect example would be this right here: should, would, could. 3 common sight words.
Mhm.
This is normal. That's normal. This is normal. That's the only tough part is the OUL. So we teach them OUL is saying in this word. Let's sound it out. Should, would. And it helps them understand that that's what OUL says. We're teaching them phonics at the same time as we're teaching them this word. So it not only helps them to read more words, but when you're actually breaking a word down, it makes it stickier in the kid's head. Instead of saying, okay, I'm going to memorize this whole thing, we're actually breaking that thing down and saying, I know 2/3 of this thing already. There's just one little part that I don't know, and I'm going to just have to learn that one little part. So they're actually going to learn the word faster than if they straight memorized it. And they're also going to be able to read more words like it in the future. So it is, it's a different question of how do you navigate that conversation as a parent. It's a different question of how do you navigate your curriculum as a teacher. But in terms of actually teaching reading, what we know is that straight memorization of words is not the strongest approach for being able to read more words that are not that word that you just memorized.
So if a school says to you, we're going to do sight words, in New York City, you're not going to change the school system. Let's be very clear. So, do you just say, okay, you do your sight words and at home, I'm going to continue what I believe is a more effective strategy? Is that too confusing for my question isn't really how to tackle the school. My question is, is that too confusing for a kid to have both methods? Or do you think they can just kind of handle that divergent approach?
So, my first instinct is there's a conversation between the parent and the teacher that needs to happen here in terms of common understanding. And one of my biggest pieces of advice for any parent of any child who goes to school is to form a really deep and really meaningful relationship with the teacher. You're putting into the bucket before you're taking out of the bucket. And not in like a generic way. Like one of the things I've pushed on my page is this teacher survey that I want people to download. I want them to print. I want them to give it to their teacher. I want them to have the teacher fill in their favorite coffee, their coffee order. I want them to fill in their favorite teacher supplies and how they feel appreciated. And I want the parent to collect it. And over the course of the year, I want the parent to be doing things for the teacher to show appreciation. As a former teacher, it means a lot when a parent takes the time to get to know you. And the reality is we are all humans. We treat every human different. Every human gets treated differently. A teacher is not treating every single parent, every single kid the same. And that might be a hot take, but as a person who I believe was a good teacher, it's going to be different depending on the relationship. And you can't control the teacher's relationship with anyone else. You can control the relationship with you. So goal number 1 is you get on the same team with the teacher. Easier for some people than others, easier in some school systems than others, but that should be goal number 1, same team. After that, there's ideally a conversation where you're saying, okay, here's what I noticed that they're coming home with. They're coming home with this list of sight words. They're coming home with this activity, but here's what I've been doing at home and why. Okay. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you're doing that at school? Whatever. And it might be, I was told to, I was forced to, I just think this is the best, whatever that thing is. And then there's a conversation around, okay, how can we come together? How can we bridge this gap to make sure that my kid is supported the best way possible in their reading? And maybe that answer is there's nothing I can do. And maybe that answer is, okay, I will only send them home with the words that are actually phonetically challenging. Or maybe that answer is, okay, we can start to introduce some of those harder sounds that are in those words so they no longer have to memorize them, but they can sound them out. But there's this whole parent side of we're building a relationship, we're engaging with the teacher, we're talking with them, we're figuring out what the difference is in our approach, and we're naming how can we work together to come to a common conclusion so we can best support our kid. Like that's the common goal. Teacher wants the best for your kid, you want the best for your kid, that's the goal, right? Let's say you're too afraid to have that conversation, the conversation goes poorly, nothing changes, you've still got that sight word list at the end of the day. I would take the list and I would divide it in half of what I would call like phonetically regular words and phonetically irregular words. So like a regular word, and I'll show this in just a second, is like and or read or that sort of thing. On, these words are going to come up a ton in reading, and some people put it on their list because these words are really common, but these words are very easy to sound out. Versus a word like said, or a word like many, or a word like the. And I would divide your list, your words into two lists and say, here's the regular words, here's the irregular words. If it's on note cards, I would sort them physically. Okay. If it's on a list, I might highlight and color code. And we're going to say, okay, what are all of the regular words? Let's start with those. And for all these regular words, we don't even have to practice these. We just have to practice our letter sounds and our blending, and they're going to be able to do it. And eventually it's going to get faster and faster and faster. And now there's a decent portion of your list that the kid just knows because they're good at reading. They know the sounds, they know how to blend them together. We tackle those words separately. Those irregular words that come home on the list, I would teach just the way that I showed you, where we pull out for our kid the part that's tricky versus the part that we know. And we still teach them that word, but we're just using phonics to teach them that word. Even better, if you can group and organize the list based on words that have similar parts. So any and many are going to get learned together. Go and so are going to get learned together. To and do are going to get learned together. Could, should, would, come, and some. We're putting these together. So as we're teaching the tough parts, our kids are starting to see the pattern. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, that's how I would tackle it.
So I could literally ask you probably 2 more hours of questions, but I think that people would like to ask their questions. So I'm going to open it. I'm going to read you some of the questions that people have written in. Thank you guys for writing in. And then if we have time at the end, I'll selfishly go back to some more of my questions. So someone wrote in, I think you answered this to some extent. My son is almost 4 years old. Did we miss the boat on teaching him all of this? Are his neurons firing in a different way than a 2-year-old? And I think, again, this is kind of similar to my experience of like, I should have done something sooner. I just want to walk away from this. And,
Yeah.
What are your thoughts?
No, you did not miss the boat. There really is no missing the boat because this is a spectrum. Like, there's no day. My son is 4 now. His brain is firing faster than my brain. I am 32 or 33 or something. I forget. But like, he's much younger than me. His brain is better than my brain. Like, that's just the way it works. He remembers things differently. He remembers things better than I do. It's a spectrum. There's not like, oh, they turn 3, they can't learn. Oh, they turn 4, they can't learn. It is just a spectrum. And there's certain periods of a kid's life where they're like really like well suited to be able to learn. And that is early childhood. And I believe it's also again around like puberty, where like the brain is just really firing. So no, you definitely didn't miss the boat. There is no missing the boat. And ultimately, I've had so many students and so many families, my first grade families, the kids are 6. They are at like the kind of like developmental level in terms of reading of a 4-year-old. And I'm the first person telling the parent that the kid is behind. And that can feel really overwhelming. It can feel really stressful. It can feel like we should have started sooner, but there's nothing that you can do. There's nothing. And my conversation with every parent is there's nothing that we can do to change the past. All we can do is work together as hard as we can for your kid. Now, in the scheme of things, starting at 4 is still earlier than most kids start. So you are starting later than I started with my son. You are starting earlier than probably 80% of at least America in terms of reading. And I would say if your 4-year-old knows all their sounds, they're hitting a kindergarten, a 5 and 6-year-old standard. So that's just for context. It's not typical for 4-year-olds to be reading. It's not typical for 5-year-olds to be reading well, right? So no, The answer is no. No boat missed. If you're feeling like the boat is missed, it's probably not going to be very helpful for you in getting started because it's going to feel overwhelming and you're going to kind of carry this burden with you. All you can do is say, you know what? I think tomorrow is going to be a good time to start. I think tomorrow I can make 2 or 3 minutes and I think I can try it out. After, I can message Spencer and I can get feedback and I can see how it goes and he's going to help support me. But there is definitely no missing the boat. There's only how can we look forward and how can we support our kid and what does our kid need to be successful?
Well said. I don't know how much this is kind of what you do. Do you recommend anything to do with kids after they read a book to make sure the comprehension, is there? So you mentioned, in second grade doing that kind of switch to, reading to learn. Is there any way? How can we help them with that, or how can we see if they're even doing that?
Yeah. What's interesting is I don't focus on this myself, and it throws people off because they're like, oh, you're just teaching kids to like read words and not to comprehend. There's a ton of myths about reading comprehension. And it's actually a big focus of my previous work, and part of the work I did with school teachers and school coaches was helping them to understand how reading has shifted and how our knowledge of how reading works has changed. And one of the biggest areas that we've learned is how kids comprehend. And in the past, the thought was there's levels of questioning. There's Bloom's taxonomy, and there's this basic questions and then more advanced questions. And you've got to ask kids questions in this order. And, the more questions you ask, the better they comprehend. And what we know now is that that's not true. There's a couple big factors that are going to affect if your kid understands what they read. The number one factor is going to be how well they could read it. Because if your kid is spending all of their brain power focused on what do those letters mean? Oh, that's a C in that word. Is that the k or is that the s? Well, let me try it with both and see. By the time they finish, they're not going to remember what they read anyways. So what I'm doing is I'm saying the vast majority of kids in America struggle to read. Let's fix that. Let's fix the reading, because they're definitely not going to comprehend if they're not understanding. So that's one big component. The second big component is the complexity of the text. How hard is the book that they're reading? And that's not just the words in the book. That's the topic. That's the theme. There's some books that start with the end and then go to the beginning. There's some books that have multiple plot lines that are coming together. There's some books where the author names what's happening, and there's some books where the author hints at what's happening, and you've got to be the one who figures that out. So we're really good at reading. We've also got to be reading a book that generally, if the book is less complex, it's going to be easier. If it's more complex, it's going to be harder. So our kids need practice with reading increasingly complex books. Number 3, and this one is huge, is your kids' background knowledge. It's how much they know about the world. Because let's say it is not a very complex book and they can read all the words. If that book is about equestrian and your kid knows nothing about equestrian, I'm not going to understand that book very well. So there's the subject matter of the book, which really matters, and that connects to how much your kid knows about the world. And this is where talking to your kid, asking them questions, taking them places and talking about what they see and connecting these concepts for kids is going to play a huge role in their reading comprehension. And then there's vocabulary. And there's what are the specific words the author is using. And so those 4 things, there's like kind of other smaller points too, but that all comes together to form, does your kid understand what they're reading? And my specific pocket is let's focus on the reading part. As the parent, let's have you focus on the books you put in front of them and the background knowledge that you build with them about how the world works.
Great. I find this is a question I actually wrote down on my paper, but somebody wrote in, and I think you had started to address this just now in your example. How do you help them understand letters with different sounds? So you gave the example of the C making a K or a S. Mm-hmm. How do you help them work through figuring out which one?
So I have people start with the primary sound. And to give 2 examples, there is like vowels, where there's a short vowel sound, F, and a long vowel sound, E. So I'm calling the primary sound eh. When this is without another vowel, generally, it's going to say eh. And that's the sound that we start with. With consonants, there's consonants like the letter G, which can say g, and it can say ch. And I start with the sound g. We start with one of the letter sounds. And there are rules to when the letter sound changes. And we get to those rules, but we don't get to them until they know the basic primary sound. We say, okay, the first sound we're going to learn here is eh. Once we know all these basic sounds, we're going to learn the situations where it says e. We're going to learn the sound g. Then once we know it, we're going to learn the situations in which it says ch. And we're going to give lots and lots of practice on those words. So we start with the basics, we switch to the advanced stuff, and then it's really a matter of practice. And I would take my whiteboard and I would fill it up with words like magic or gem or gypsy, where there's an E, an I, or a Y, changing that G sound. I'm just going to give them lots and lots of examples so they can see, oh, G says this too. J, 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 j.
And in your course, you would help them figure out, because I don't even know those words. I don't even know what the rules are anymore. I just, know how to read. So you would help people kind of figure out those rules.
So yeah, and there's kind of like two ways that people approach rules. There's one, which is like directly teaching the rule. And there's two, which is giving lots of practice around that sound. Mm-hmm. I lean towards lots of practice because the demographic I work with is really young. Mm-hmm. So if I was teaching first grade or second grade, I would skew more towards the rules. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to be able to explain to a 3-year-old very effectively when G is by E, I, or Y, it makes the J sound. But if it's followed by A or E, well, I guess the word gem. Yeah, but it's followed by A or O or U, it makes the G sound. And then have them in their brain trying to figure out what that means. I'm going to show them G says G. That's step 1. We got that down. We're going to read a ton of words with it. Then I'm going to show them, okay, sometimes it says J, like in all these words. Let's practice that. And they're going to start to understand and pick up on the rule without me naming it. And then we're going to look at words next to each other. Some saying G, some saying Ch. And we're going to start to figure out when and how it says each sound. And I found that to be highly effective for kids who are under the age of 5.
Amazing. Someone had written in, what books do you recommend for 5-year-olds? I don't know if that means a 5-year-old who's reading already, or if that means for, I guess maybe we'll broaden that question. Do you recommend starting at the same place based on level, or do you kind of go more by age?
Yeah, I see now, I can see the names too. So thank you, Neil, for that question. Generally, I don't. I mean, this really depends on the kid's reading ability, but where I start is with a whiteboard and marker, and that's how I teach kids how to read. Mm-hmm. This is like the most effective tool, period. Like if you can't buy my courses, buy a whiteboard and a marker, because it allows you to customize exactly what your kid needs to read. And there's a difference here between teaching our kid to read, which is just a few minutes a day, and reading to them. Reading to them, pick topics they love, pick things that are fun, pick something that's going to expose them to something that they don't see in their day-to-day, something that's going to teach them a lesson about how to be a better person. Like do that stuff when you're reading to them. If you're teaching them, take 5 minutes and think through what your kid needs to learn. Because like I could ask you, for example, Jessica, about your 7-year-old, and I could ask a couple questions, maybe 5 or 6, just diagnostic questions. Or I can have you put her on the screen, talk to her for a couple minutes, show her a couple things, and really quickly be like, okay, she can read 3 sound words, but not 4 sound words. Mm-hmm. She's memorized a couple sight words, but that's starting to interfere because she's guessing on words that she doesn't know. And she knows some of the short vowel sounds, but she's struggling with the long vowel sounds. So I'm gonna take my marker and I'm gonna start writing some 3 sound words, and we're gonna warm up because she can do it. Then I'm gonna start writing some 4 sound words with some of those long vowel sounds because that's what she needs. Mm-hmm. And 5 minutes of that is gonna give her more practice on exactly what she needs than 30 minutes reading a random book.
Mhm.
So I'm focused here first. And by the time that your kid is like really reading, they're like, they're able to kind of see sentences, put them together. Then I'm opening up books and I'm doing the same thing. I'm opening up the book and I'm seeing, okay, does this target the thing that they need? Again, this is what I'm teaching the kid to read. 90% of the time, we are reading to our son. Okay. A small percentage of the time, he's reading to us, and we are controlling what he's reading so that it's building his skills and building his ability.
How frequently would you recommend sounds, letters, learning for a 3-year-old? I don't know if that means maybe, I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah. From the Evans household, thank you. I hope this is a family watching together. That would be nice. Okay, I will put an arbitrary number in this, which is like 4 times a week. And that's kind of me pulling it out of thin air. But 3 times a week or less, to me, is hard to feel like a routine. And I think you're going to spend a lot more time reviewing what they've forgotten than you are going to be introducing them to new things to learn. So there's like a day of the week. We can look at it like horizontally, like let's shoot for 4 days a week. Okay. Ultimately, do what you can, but let's shoot for like 4. Okay. 5 is better. 6 is better than 5, right? It's the same thing. It's like, how many days should I go to the gym? Mm-hmm. Like probably like at least 3 or 4 if I want to see some results, right? Got to start to make it consistent. And then if this isn't too confusing, there's like a vertical aspect of it within each day that says you can introduce or cover those letters and those sounds at different points during the day. And that's completely up to you. So I have some families who are like, we are not going to have a set learning time. We're just going to have these letters out and about. And when the kid walks over to it, or when we have the time, we're just going to make like 30 seconds. Bam. They're like 2 or 3 times during the day, really short. They're going to hit the sounds. Some people, this is how I did it. I'm going to have 1 block. Mm-hmm. 1 block during that I focus. But I would recommend, if you can, for your 3-year-old, at least 4 days a week. And you can pick if you're doing multiple sessions during the day or just 1 session. But again, it doesn't have to be a lot of time. Consistency is going to be better. So doing 4 minutes across 5 days for 20 minutes total is better than doing 20 minutes once. And all the research we have on learning and brains and all that sort of stuff is going to back that up too. A little bit a day is going to be much better than trying to do big chunks.
Well, that's super helpful. So I also think that feels more doable for most of us, probably, right? To shove a minute in there, here or there. So that's good to hear. I love this question just because of the patients that I have in my practice. My 2-year-old has an expressive language delay. Is there ways I can teach him to read now, or should I not attempt that yet?
Yep. Great question, Jamie. So the first part of this is, if trying to teach your 2-year-old to read interferes in any way with the work you were doing in their speech, then I wouldn't do it. I would keep the oral language the priority at this point. With our son, he did not have a delay, but we were taking a speech course at the same time as I was teaching him to read. And we knew in our household the speech was more important. And if my stuff was interfering with that stuff, we would have stopped. But we found a way to do both. So the speech is going to be number 1. Number 2, yeah. So like, if this is an expressive language delay, that means that they're still understanding and they're still able to be like receptive of that sound. So there's ways that you can show them that sound, like this sound, where they never have to actually say or express the sound to you. You can put it on the floor at 2. Jumping might not be a thing, but like walking to, touching, you can put 2 sounds out and say, touch the sound that says k, touch the sound that says eh. You can play any sort of game. Throw, if your 2-year-old likes throwing, throw the sound, right? And what you're doing is you're switching from a like produce the sound orally to just literally recognize the sound. And what's going to happen is, assuming you're still able to focus on speech, is once their speech catches up, they're already going to know what that thing is. So it's kind of like the example I mentioned at the very beginning. My son knew who mom was before he could say mom. once his speech caught up, he already knew mom, dad. It wasn't like we were just starting then, okay? Ultimately, at 2, there is no rush. There's no rush. Please don't hear me saying that. But if you want to help support them, you definitely can. You're just going to try and turn it into an identification game versus a let's reproduce the sound game.
I love that answer. At such a young age, our child has difficulty sitting still the way an older child with more focus is capable of doing. Do you have any specific methods to help them focus and enjoy this experience while learning?
Yep. I'm assuming this is maybe Mason and RE is the last name. But this is a great question. Focus is a skill. It is a skill that is built over time, the same way that a muscle is built and developed. And just like muscles, we have less of them when we're little, and then the body grows and we develop more muscles over time and also increase and strengthen those muscles. Your child's focus is the same way. The younger a child is, the smaller their focus and attention is. And as they get older, that focus and attention builds. At the same time, by working with them, by building a routine, we can accelerate that focus. We can accelerate that attention the same way that we can go to the gym and work out and accelerate that muscle growth, if that analogy makes sense to you. So there's part of this that is nature, which is your kid is really little. Little kids don't focus well. They fact, right? That's just what happens when you're little. And part of this is nurture. If you're putting them in environments and situations where you're asking them to focus for these really little periods of time, and you're slowly, incrementally building it, your child's focus is going to increase. And it's not like you're going to be pushing them or forcing them, but it will get better, and you'll see that they're able to focus for longer and longer periods of time. Now, I make a hard line between focus and attention and sitting still, okay? There's parts of sitting still that just don't need to happen. I did some of this with my son as we were learning to read, and I wish I could take that away and make it all movement. We also did some movement too. And the more I've had my courses and the more families who've signed up, the more videos I get of people making this super fun and super engaging. So the advice is like, on focus, it's gonna build, and there's stuff that you can do to build it. On sitting still, like, let's just get rid of that. Let's find something that your kid wants to do. Let's find a way to get them looking at the sound, saying the sound, identifying the sound, and let's get them engaged and involved so they want to keep doing it, right? And if they give you 60 seconds, great. Day 2, go for 70, go for 80, and try and slowly build up from there. But definitely, you do not need them just like sitting still in front of you like a robot in order to learn how to read.
That's great. A couple other things that I'm going to throw at you before we kind of wrap up. If you teach these kids to learn, if you teach your kid, my kid, to learn before they enter school, they're going to end up coming in ahead of most kids. We've already established that in terms of reading. What happens to them? I'm in New York City. Our class size is big. There's not a lot of one-on-one attention. What happens to them when they come in and they're now ahead of the game? How do you prevent them getting bored? I remember my 5th grade math teacher did the entire 6th grade. And then I went to 6th grade and I said, I can't do this. I'm bored. You need to give me something to do. And my teacher, because I was a nerd, and my teacher said to me, no, we're doing 6th grade math. If you already did it, your problem. And I think being bored in school is like a curse. So what do you do with these kids when they get to school to kind of keep them engaged?
Yeah, I don't know if you're going to love my answer.
Okay.
There's no way for me to answer this question without offending someone, whether it's teachers or people who are parents of kids who are bored or people who are bored. I don't fully believe in boredom in school. I think more often it is a child who has challenges with behavior, who is being labeled as bored because that's easier. Mm-hmm. It's a child who's missing some of the other really, really, really critical skills that a child should enter kindergarten with, like the ability to follow the teacher's directions, like the ability to socialize appropriately and make friends, right? Like the ability to organize the materials. Because what happens when kids with different behavioral challenges go to school is they look for excuses for why they're behaving how they look, how they are. And their parents affirm that. And parents want to affirm that because they want to think that their kid is brilliant. They want to think their kid is the smartest kid in the world. And again, that's why this is going to be, not everyone's cup of tea, but generally, as parents, your kid isn't as smart as you think they are. And they're not as bored as you think they are. I'm sending my son to kindergarten multiple grade levels ahead, transparently in multiple subjects. Mm-hmm. I'm not switching his grade. I'm not moving him ahead. I'm not worried about boredom because there's so much happening in a kindergarten classroom that if I can lower the stress for him in some of the academic areas, I know he's still got to get to know his teacher. I know he still needs to learn how to make friends. I know he still needs to share. I know he still needs to organize his stuff. I know he's still working on his motor skills. I know he still needs to be safe at recess. I know there's all this other stuff happening. Mm-hmm. And I see my son going in and I see him being happy because he loves to learn. Mm-hmm. He loves to be around learning. He loves being read to. He loves morning meeting. So I think there's other things at play. Yep. And then the other answer that people will hate is like, there's things that the teacher needs to do to adjust and to adapt, where your teacher's like, this is what it is, no matter what. Like, as the teacher, you are going to have kids come in behind, you're going to have kids come in ahead, you're going to have kids come in right where they need to be. And it is incumbent on you to figure out some way to differentiate over the course of the day so that kid is getting something that's going to challenge them and something that's going to push them. I think those two things can go hand in hand. You can have a kid who is ahead for the majority of the day, who has plenty of other things to focus on and learn. And hopefully for part of that day, they get a little healthy push from the teacher.
I don't think that's an offensive answer. Actually, it's exactly what we say in the pediatric world. People ask us all the time and we say, they'll work on something else. They'll work on their socializing. They'll become a leader. They'll become more physically, so I agree with you. And maybe the difference with my example is I was in 6th grade and needed to work on some of the other skills, maybe a little bit less. We'll see. I don't know what my friends would say. Do you think that learning to read by sounds, it seems like it should, does it help with spelling? My daughter just has she's reading okay, but her spelling is atrocious. Do you think ultimately it's a reversible skill? I don't know if it's really, that's the right word, but.
It does help with spelling, but it's not the same as spelling. So there's the process of learning to read, the technical term is blending. Mm-hmm. You are taking individual sounds like this and blending them together. Mm-hmm. It'd be easier to show this way. 3 individual sounds, we blend them together into one word. Mm-hmm. Spelling is called segmenting. We're taking one word and we're breaking it down. We're segmenting it into 3 sounds. Mm-hmm. That is a different phonological skill, a different auditory skill than blending, and it's generally a little bit harder.
Okay.
But they're correlated. So if you have a child who can blend like 7 sound words, you can expect them to be able to segment at least 4 or 5 sounds, right? Maybe 6 or 7. It's not going to be like this one skill grew and this other one did it all. They're connected and they're correlated. But segmenting is only one part of spelling, right? And it's kind of the most basic part. If you hear a word with 4 sounds, like fast, can you break the word fast into all those 4 sounds? Fast. That's the first part. And many kids struggle with that because the word fast, they might say fast or fat, or some other combination, right? Like they're missing sounds. Mm-hmm. So that should be loosely correlated to learning to read. Blending gets better, segmenting generally gets better too. It's still worth practicing on its own. The second part of spelling, which I think is really what trips a lot of kids up, is it gets more into the rules and the technical parts that I don't cover in my courses because my kids are generally younger and they're learning to read up to about a 1st or a 2nd grade reading level. And the spelling rules, 1st to 2nd to 3rd grade, start to get increasingly complex. So let's say that a kid is spelling the word fight. The first skill is, can you hear all 3 sounds? Fight. Okay, they got it. And then there's two sounds that child is very likely going to know which are the F and the T, saying, we're pretty sure that they know that, right? The actual correct spelling of this word is F-I-G-H-T. So it's I-G-H saying I. But I with an E at the end also says I. And I-E next to each other also says I. So whether your child spells it F-I-G-H-T or F-I-T-E or F-I-E-T really depends on their knowledge of different phonics patterns, right? And that's generally where, like, if there's a T in words like night, light, fight, might, right, then it's that IGH spelling. So if your daughter or anyone else's child is having trouble with spelling, I would do like 2 quizzes. I would tell them a word, and I would see if they can hear and tell me every sound in that word. That's going to tell me if they can segment it. Can they hear 5 sounds and tell you all those 5 sounds back to you? If they can do that, I would go to phonics and I would see, okay, do they have these spelling patterns down? If I give them a long vowel word, are they getting it right or wrong? What are the patterns they're getting wrong the most? Let's start to teach those. And as the parent, you don't need to know all the rules. You just need to know your best guess. Look at some words. Look at the IGH and be like, why is this IGH in that word? Oh, because with the T, it always says that, right? And you just give your kid your best guess as to that phonics rule.
I would love to close out on a little bit of a different note, if it's okay, because I saw your Instagram post, maybe it was yesterday, and I really loved what you said. So I just wanted to see if you could kind of paraphrase for us. You talked about not telling kids they're smart.
Yeah.
And it really, I mean, I grew up being told I was smart, and I think it set me up for some challenges. And it's something I really try to watch with my daughter, and I mess up sometimes. And I would really love for you to repeat what you said, because I think it just hits a place that means a lot, I think, to a lot of parents to hear.
Yeah, that post did really well, which I've been in like a rut on Instagram. So that was wonderful, but not wonderful for the sake of it, because I get to reach more families anytime a post is getting engagement. But, you know, you can take the word smart and replace it for any kind of positive, definitive attribute that we say, this is what a kid was born with. But what happens when you tell a kid that they're smart is they come to believe that there's something different about them. There's something that they were born with that is different than other kids. And this is called a fixed mindset. You might be told you are athletic, you are smart, you are artistic, whatever that adjective is to describe you. When you're given that label and you hear it enough and you start to believe it, it changes not only the positive stuff that you think about yourself, it changes the negative stuff you think about yourself. A kid who's told you're smart, you're smart, you're smart, because they're getting answers right, when that kid gets the answer wrong, they are going to think that they're done. It is going to happen, and it does happen. And the reason why I put that post up is because I worked with 2 boys over the weekend who were having trouble with their spelling and trouble with their reading. And one of them was leaving school every day, just crying, just really upset. And it's someone that our family knows. So I went over and I went to assess them and figure out where they're at. And both of them, all they kept saying is, I'm bad at this. I'm so bad at spelling. I can't spell. I can't do this. I can't do that. These kids are 6 years old. You know, like, for people who are opposing early learning or saying like this doesn't matter, it's too certain, like, kids know. These are 6-year-olds saying that they're not smart, saying that they can't spell, saying that they can't do this, because these are children their whole lives who have heard, you're so athletic, you're so good at this, you're so good at that, you're so good at this, you're such a leader. The inverse of that is really, really, really problematic. And there is research by Carol Dweck on the impact of a growth mindset, which is when you tell a kid, okay, not you're so smart, but the way that you went about doing that, right? Like, I am like proud of you, or you should be proud of yourself because you experienced a challenge and you didn't give up, right? You're describing behaviors again. You're saying, you focused for 3 minutes. You didn't stop until you got it, right? You are demonstrating this behavior, but we always want to give kids things that they can repeat and things that they can do again, instead of just naming, you are this, you are that thing, right? And there's even in the post, my point is like, when you call a kid smart, they're going to call themselves dumb down the line, and it inevitably happens. I was called smart growing up. I was called athletic, all this stuff. And I internalized this belief that I'm just not good at art. I had no growth mindset. I'm a bad reader. I will never be good at reading. I believe that my whole life. I still fight it today. But not only that, like, you know, even if it's true, even if your kid is like super smart, super bright, and never gets anything wrong, like, what does that do for how your kid goes through life and interacts, how they think about themselves versus other people? Like, is that the kind of kid that you want to raise? And for some people, that's a tough concept. And I would recommend maybe reading a little bit more about it, or examining a little bit, or thinking about your life, times when you were told that you were naturally really good at something versus when you weren't. You know, but I will die on that hill. We're all going to do it. We are all going to do it. But as much as possible, dial it back and start to name specific behaviors that your kid is doing that they can do again.
I literally had you in my mind today because I had a parent asking me about, a kid who's very much a perfectionist and really won't tackle something they're not good at. And we spoke a lot about, really reframing for this kid being good at the process, not at the result, right? Being good at trying hard, being good at the strategy. And I was like channeling your Instagram post as I was talking about it. So I felt that. We have no more questions, and I feel like I've taken up a ton of your time, which I so appreciate. Any closing words for the audience that you kind of want to leave them with?
Yeah, I would say, like, if you are a parent or of a little one, it doesn't matter their age. There's something that you can do now, and there is no like starting too late. There's no missing the boat. There's just you and your kid, your grandkid, your nephew, and where you want them to go and how you think this can help. And if it is me, and if it's reading, like, great. If it is like math, if it is social skills, if it's following directions, if it's any of these other things that are helpful for your kid and your development, like, wonderful. But like, my fundamental belief about parenting is hard. Like, nobody is inherently like amazing at it. And because it's hard, we work as hard as we can to get better. And I think that is a different message than you're going to hear some folks say around parenting, of like, oh, it's hard, so let's just like leave it be. Like, I'm not really that guy. I believe that your kid deserves it. And because parenting's hard, because this is challenging, because your kid is so important to you and you love them so much, there is always going to be something that you can be working towards with them. And I feel the same way about my son. And if that's reading, wonderful. It's not, no sweat, right? But my hope for parents, and why my page exists, is to help give your kid an opportunity for the best in their life, to help to open doors for them instead of close them. And I hope that message resonates with folks, and I hope this was helpful. And if anyone wants to reach out to me, ask me a question, email me, message me, just give me like 24 to 48 hours and I will respond to every message.
Thank you so much for being on today. This was really, really interesting, and I think really positive for parents to hear. So thank you so much.
Great. You're welcome.
So thanks everybody for tuning in. I hope you guys had as much fun as I did. I really love Spencer's passion for what he does. I hope we all find things to be that passionate about. And I love the idea that we all can parent in a way that makes our kids happy and healthy, and we'll find our way to do that. If you haven't already checked out the prior podcasts, please, I'd love it if you did. Our first one was with Judy Delaware from Feeding Littles, who's also amazing. And our second was with Ashley Olsen from Heaven Sent Sleep. And it doesn't get better than this group that we've had so far. We'll be coming up with another one soon. In the meantime, if anything comes up, feel free to reach out to me. My information's on there. And have a great night. Happy reading.